This tutorial is part of our YouTube playlist, Try Flask API Development, so you can watch this course from the start if you prefer. Now, alternatively, if you enjoy this course, you can also purchase this course on Udemy, where you'll find deeper content, source code, and course updates. Links to both the playlist and Udemy course can be found in the video description. Working with Docker containers and images, predefined images, it does sometimes require us to actually create a more advanced setup script so that when we create the container, it then creates our database in a very specific way to meet the requirements of our project. So although this might be quite an advanced setup option, I think it is important for us to have a basic understanding of this or be aware of this because it will be beneficial at some point if you are using Postgres database containers for your project. So in addition to specifying settings here within the Docker Compose file to potentially make changes to the container when we run the container, we can also pass in instructions into the container, assuming that the application within inside the container can handle those instructions and is set up to actually look and find those instructions. We can pass some additional instructions in. It just happens that with Postgres database, when the Postgres database container starts, it will look for a setup script and run that setup script to actually set up the Postgres database, maybe specifically for your project needs. So let's start off by creating a new folder in our project. Let's call this scripts. It's going to be on the root directory. And then let's go inside of scripts and we're going to create a new file. So let's call this db-setup. And this is going to be .sh. So an sh file is a shell script file that's going to contain a series of commands or instructions that's going to be executed by the shell interpreter. So within our Postgres container, when it gets initiated, it's going to run this script. Now, what's important here is that we're building a script which is going to be compatible with the underlying system that's used in the container. So if you remember here, we were using Alpine. Now, if we were using different versions, potentially we would have to define or identify the actual shell that's being used in that particular container so that we design the script for that particular shell. Now, here we're utilizing Alpine. So what we're going to do here is create a script which is written for the Bourne shell interpreter. So first of all, we're going to start off with the shebang. So we're going to go for the, let's get the keys in order. So /bin /sh. So the shebang line here at the beginning of the script specifies the path to the shell interpreter that should be executed or should be used, to execute this script. So in this case, it specifies the Bourne shell. So what we need to do, in actual fact, although you are not aware of this yet, when we actually build our models for our database, there are a few different extensions that we're going to need to install. Well, just one extension that we're going to need to install. So Postgres is modular. So we can install Postgres database and then we can install different extensions to enhance or change the functionality of our database. So within our database that we're going to be building, we're going to need to install an extension, which is the UUID extension, so that we can use UUID fields or allow the database to create data for that particular type of field within our database. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to show you and take you through a basic script where we are going to create a database. So we're going to ask Postgres database when we create the container to build a new database. And then what we're going to do is install an extension. Now, first thing that we're going to do is make sure that we're using a user to actually perform this functionality. So PG user. So in some respects, we could think of this as our container starts, our Postgres container starts, the database is running, and then what we're going to do is manually or automatically define code that we're going to run in a terminal. And that's the same as if we were to log in and run this code, but we're just going to do this automatically through this script. So PG user. So we specify the user, that's going to be Postgres. You may have changed the Postgres username, so you can go ahead and do that. So then we're going to create a new database, so PSQL, and let's remember. So we're going to use the C flag here. So this line will execute a command to create a new PostgreSQL database. So the C option here, flag as I call it, specifies that the following SQL command should be executed as a single command string. So let's go ahead and say create database. So create database, and then we can specify the database. So FK Commerce, that's going to be the name of our database. Right, so we've now created a new database. So we now need to install an extension into that database. We need to install an extension for that database. So PSQL again. The reason I'm using PSQL is this is the command line utility for interacting with PostgreSQL databases. So this command allows me then to interact with our Postgres database. So let's go ahead and install the extension. So we want to specify the database that we want to install the extension for. This is just one approach. And then let's go ahead and create extension. So create extension if not exist. So it might already exist, so we can specify that. And then let's go for on the key, backslash, and then we want to specify UUID OSSP. So this is the extension that we're going to be installing. So we're going to need that, and then semicolon, and finish that up. Because I've done something wrong here. I didn't add the doubles. I did. Okay, it's okay. We're good. We're good. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see. Or I can just drop that down a bit. So that's the line of code that we've just added. This is going to create a new extension for the specified database. So it is all relevant. We are going to be utilizing the FK Commerce database for our project. So we have now set up that, or we'll have set up that, and we will have now set up the extension that we're going to need to create the tables in our database. So before we apply those changes, let's just remind ourselves in the add miner here, you can see that these are the databases, that we have available inside of our database at the moment. So of course, now we're going to create the new container and then run this add miner again. So we should then have a new database, and we should then be able to see the different extensions that have been installed for that database. Before we run this new setup, we're going to need to specify it within the Docker Compose file. So within our Docker Compose file, let's go ahead and create a new volume. And then what we're going to do in simple terms is we're going to copy the scripts folder within our project. So // referring to this folder / then the folder called scripts. So just make sure that matches. And then we're going to map that across. So we're essentially building the container. We're going to copy across everything that's in the scripts folder here to a folder on the container. So the Postgres database is going to look for a folder when it initiates for any setup scripts. So we need to copy this into that folder. So docker entry point init db.d. Right, so this Docker entry point init db.d directory is a special directory, which is recognized by some Docker images, typically database management systems. So Postgres database, when it initiates, it's going to look for this directory, look for any files, and it's going to then run all the files, any files in this folder. Now, in addition to the setup script, we could also add some data here. So some SQL files, which the database would then try and run and actually maybe create all the tables and add all the data into the database. So we could fully automate, we could fully automate, I don't know what to say, automate. We could fully automate the process of one, creating the database instance, and then at the same time, create the database, the tables, and the data all at one time. So we're not going that far in this tutorial. We're just setting up a few different parameters so that we can then go ahead and build our tables within our application. Right, so with that set, let's just make sure that we don't have any containers. So we delete those containers, and then we go ahead and run our command again to create the new containers with the new settings. So Docker compose up D. Now we go back. So the new containers have been created. So let's just check that out now in adminer. We're going to need to log in again, the password being Postgres. So this time, actually, it's not taken. So the database doesn't look like it has been created just yet. So now we can think about troubleshooting. So let's go back to our containers. Let's go to DB1. And what we can now do is have a look through the log here in our logs and see if we can find any problems. Now, looking a bit further down here, it looks like there was a problem. Let's see if we can find it. There we go. So here it says that bad interpreter, permission denied. So it looks like potentially we have copied the file across, but potentially it cannot access that file due to potentially some sort of file or folder permission. Now, if you are running Windows, you may not have this problem at all. So it's likely that that is going to be absolutely fine. But here on the Mac or Linux, we potentially need to change the file permissions for the DB setup script file. So let's take a look at the permissions for that file. Now, at the moment, if I type in ls, you can see that this terminal currently resides in the root directory of our project. I can cd into scripts. I don't have to, but just to show you this, I can change directory, cd into scripts folder. So when I press ls now, you can see that what is shown is the setup file, indicating that now we've kind of navigated through the terminal inside of that folder. Okay, so now inside of that, what we can now do is type in on the Mac ls and l. So that gives me an idea now of who has access and what type of permissions are set on that script. So this indicates here that I've highlighted that these permissions have been set and they do not currently allow execute permission. So what we potentially need to do here is to change those permissions. So I use a ch mod to change those permissions. So let's go for +X for execute and then just specify the file. In this case, it's going to be db setup.sh. Notice I didn't type in the whole thing. I pressed D and then pressed tab to finish that off. So I'll go ahead and change the permission. So if I do an LSL now, you can see that we've got the execute now permission available on that script. So let's go ahead and try this again. So we'll go back into Docker here. We'll go ahead and delete these containers. We'll try recreating them. And then we'll give this a go again. So let's go back into adminer. We're going to need to log in again. And this time you can see we now have the database. So it looks like the script was successful. If I take a look at this new database, you can see that we have installed UUID. So it looks like the script has worked successfully. Excellent. So assuming that you have followed along and everything is working as shown in this tutorial, then we are now ready to build our Flask API.